My wife died years ago. Every month I sent her mom $300 until I found out. You can't just stop sending money without warning. Kesha made you promise to take care of me, and that means every month the full amount. If you're having money problems, get a second job. Take out a loan. I don't care what you have to do, but that money needs to be in my account by tomorrow. Diane Jefferson's voice cut through the phone line like a blade. 67 years old, Kesha's mother, the woman Jerome Williams had been supporting for 5 years without question, untouchable because she represented a sacred promise to a dying wife. And if you don't, Diane continued, her tone shifting to something darker, I might have to share some things Kesha told me about you before she died. Things about how you really treated her. Things your work might find interesting. Things Zara's school should probably know about her father. Jerome Williams felt his hand tighten around the phone. 38 years old. Electrician. Single father raising an 8-year-old daughter in Chicago's South Side. For 5 years, he'd sent $300 every month to honor what he believed was his dead wife's final wish. What Diane Jefferson did next would expose a conspiracy that had been stealing from grieving families for over a decade. Comment where you're listening from, subscribe to channel. Let me tell you who Jerome Williams really was before we get to how they destroyed him. Born in Englewood, 1986, South Side, Chicago. The kind of neighborhood where streetlights stayed broken and police responded in hours, not minutes. His mother, Patricia Williams, worked 3 jobs: morning shift at the hospital cafeteria, afternoon cleaning offices downtown, overnight stocking shelves at Jewel Osco. His father left when Jerome was 4. No explanation. No forwarding address. Just gone. Jerome grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment that always smelled like pine sol and exhaustion. His mother's hands were permanently raw from industrial cleaning chemicals. She'd come home at 6 a.m., sleep until noon, then start the cycle again. Jerome learned early how to be invisible, how to make cereal without waking her, how to forge her signature on permission slips, how to survive. But here's what nobody knew. Jerome Williams had a gift, not the kind they tested for in underfunded public schools, not the kind that showed up on standardized tests designed to fail kids who looked like him. A different kind of intelligence. He could see how systems worked. Mini cliffhanger. At 12, he rewired the apartment building's electrical panel because the superintendent was too drunk to fix it, and his mother couldn't afford another night without heat. He'd watched YouTube videos on the library computer, memorized the color codes, understood the logic of circuits the way other kids understood basketball plays. By 15, Jerome was fixing electrical problems for neighbors. Cash under the table. $20 to replace an outlet. $50 for a ceiling fan installation. He saved every dollar in a coffee can hidden behind the refrigerator. His mother never knew. She had enough to worry about. At 17, Patricia Williams collapsed at work. Massive stroke. Dead before the ambulance arrived at the hospital where she'd spent 15 years serving food to doctors who never learned her name. Jerome became a ward of the state overnight, bounced between 3 foster homes in 6 months. The first family took his savings, $417 he'd been collecting for 2 years. The second family locked the refrigerator and made him eat after their biological kids finished. The third family was decent enough, but distant. He was a paycheck to them. Nothing more. He graduated high school by pure force of will. No family at the ceremony, no one to take photos. He walked across that stage at 17 years old, collected his diploma, and started working construction the next day. Trade school came at night. Electrical certification program at Kennedy King College. He was the youngest student by 5 years, the only black student in most classes. Instructors assumed he was there for diversity requirements, not because he could run circles around their journeyman electricians. Jerome proved them wrong quietly, top of his class. Perfect score on the licensing exam. Certified electrician at 19. That's when he met Kesha Jefferson. She was 21, worked at a beauty supply store on 79th Street. Smile that could stop traffic. Laugh that made Jerome forget about every hard year behind him. She noticed him when he came in to fix the store's flickering lights. Asked if he wanted to grab lunch. He said yes. 3 months later, they were inseparable. 6 months later, engaged. A year after that, married at the courthouse with 2 witnesses pulled from the hallway. Kesha's mother, Diane Jefferson, didn't approve. Made that clear from day one. She'd wanted better for her daughter. Better than a tradesman from the South Side. Better than someone who'd grown up in foster care. Better than Jerome Williams. But Kesha insisted she loved him, and Diane eventually accepted the marriage with icy tolerance. Jerome and Keisha moved into a small house in Chatham. 2 bedrooms, postage stamp yard, foundation problems, and outdated wiring. Jerome fixed himself. It was theirs. That mattered more than the peeling paint or the furnace that clanked like it was angry. Their daughter, Zara, arrived 2 years into the marriage. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Perfect. Jerome held her in the delivery room and felt something shift in his chest. Purpose, protection, a reason beyond survival. For 8 years, life was hard but good. Jerome worked overtime constantly. Weekends, holidays. Every emergency electrical call paid for Zara's preschool, groceries, the mortgage. Kesha managed the house and finances. They argued sometimes about money. Everyone did. But nothing serious. Nothing that suggested what was coming. Then Kesha got diagnosed. Stage 3 breast cancer. Aggressive, fast-moving. The oncologist gave them treatment options that all sounded like torture. Chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, maybe all 3. Maybe none of it would work. Jerome took out a second mortgage to pay for treatment. Kesha's insurance covered some of it, but not enough. Never enough. He worked 16-hour days, came home exhausted, sat with Kesha while she vomited from chemo, held Zara while she cried, asking why Mommy was always sick. Diane showed up during treatment, played the devoted mother, brought soup, sat with Kesha during appointments, started talking about end-of-life planning, estate planning, making sure Zara would be taken care of when the worst happened. Jerome hated those conversations, felt like giving up. But Kesha insisted they needed to be practical. That's when Kesha made him promise. March 2019. Hospital room at Northwestern Memorial. Kesha looked small in the bed, too thin, oxygen tube in her nose. Diane sitting in the corner, knitting something Jerome never saw completed. Jerome, Kesha's voice was weak. I need you to promise me something. He took her hand. Anything. My mom, she's going to be alone when I'm gone. Social Security isn't enough. She'll need help. $300 a month, just until she's stable. Can you do that for me? Jerome looked at Diane. The woman who'd never thought he was good enough for her daughter. The woman who'd made every family gathering uncomfortable with her cold disapproval. But this was Kesha asking, his wife, mother of his child. I promise, he said. 3 days later, Kesha Williams died, or so Jerome was told. The hospital called at 4:47 a.m., March 18, 2019. Diane answered because Jerome couldn't make his hand stop shaking long enough to pick up the phone. Complications from treatment, respiratory failure. She'd passed peacefully. They were sorry for his loss. The funeral happened fast. Diane handled everything. Cremation. Service at a funeral home Jerome had never heard of. Closed casket because the cancer had taken too much. Jerome sat through it in a fog. Zara beside him, 8 years old, crying into his shoulder. Diane gave him the urn afterward, handed him a box of Keisha's belongings, and a piece of paper with bank account information. For the promise you made, Diane said. $300 a month, she made you swear. Jerome nodded. Started the payments in April 2019. For 5 years, he never missed a month. That was his first mistake. The money came out like clockwork. First of every month, Jerome set up automatic transfer through his bank. $300 from his checking account to the routing number Diane had provided. No questions, no verification, just faith in a promise made to his dying wife. Meanwhile, Jerome Williams was drowning. The medical bills from Keisha's treatment didn't disappear with her death. $37,000 in remaining debt. Collections agencies called daily, threatened to garnish his wages, destroy his credit, take the house. He picked up every overtime shift available. Worked holidays, worked weekends, worked until his hands shook from exhaustion and his back screamed from climbing ladders 12 hours straight. Zara needed new shoes. Jerome bought them from Goodwill. School supplies, dollar store, birthday parties. Jerome sent her with homemade cupcakes because store-bought cost too much. She never complained. That made it worse. The house fell apart slowly. Furnace broke in January 2021. Jerome jury-rigged a space heater setup that probably violated fire code. Roof leaked that spring. He patched it with tar and prayer. The kitchen sink dripped. He lived with it. $300 every month to Diane Jefferson, while his own daughter wore shoes that pinched her toes. But Jerome never questioned it. A promise was a promise. Mini cliffhanger. The relationship with Diane stayed distant. She called occasionally, always stiff, always brief. Never asked about Zara, never asked how Jerome was managing. Just confirmed the payment arrived and hung up. Jerome tried visiting her once, 2020, wanted to bring Zara to see her grandmother, the address Diane had given him, supposedly a senior living facility in West Rogers Park. Didn't exist. He drove around for an hour. Nothing matched. He called Diane to confirm. "Oh, we moved," she said vaguely. "The new place is better, but they're strict about visitors. Maybe later." Later never came. Jerome accepted it. Diane had always been cold. Grief probably made it worse. He focused on keeping the lights on and food in the refrigerator. The years blurred together. 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. Every month, $300 disappeared into Diane's account. Every month, Jerome worked himself to exhaustion to make up the difference. Zara grew. Started elementary school, made friends, brought home report cards with straight A's, asked questions about her mother that Jerome answered with stories that got harder to remember accurately. "Did Mommy like pizza?" "Yes." "Pepperoni." "Did Mommy know how to swim?" "Yes." Learned at a community pool. "Does Grandma Diane ever want to see me?" Jerome paused. "She's dealing with her grief, baby. Give her time." Time. Always more time. That's what everyone needed, apparently. By 2024, Jerome Williams had sent Diane Jefferson $18,000, 60 consecutive monthly payments. Never late, never questioned, never knowing the truth. Until Troy Henderson noticed something wrong. Troy had been Jerome's best friend since high school, one of the few people who'd shown up to Patricia Williams' funeral, the only person who'd lent Jerome money during Keisha's treatment without expecting repayment. Troy worked customer service at First National Bank, processing transactions, handling account issues, boring work that paid steady. February 2024. Troy called Jerome after midnight. That was weird. Troy kept normal hours, had a girlfriend, didn't make late-night calls without reason. "I need to talk to you about that account you've been sending money to." Troy's voice sounded strange. "Careful." "The one for Diane Jefferson." Jerome sat up in bed. "What about it?" "I pulled up the transaction history. Jay, that account's been active way beyond what makes sense for an elderly woman on Social Security. Large deposits, frequent transfers, activity patterns that look wrong. What do you mean wrong? I couldn't get details, privacy laws, but I can see the patterns. That account receives deposits from multiple sources, weekly, sometimes thousands of dollars. Your $300 looks like pocket change compared to what else is flowing through there. Jerome's chest tightened. Maybe she has other family helping. Maybe. But there's something else. Troy paused. The account address doesn't match what you gave me for Diane Jefferson. It's listed at Riverside Apartments on Oak Street, apartment 214. That's not a senior facility. It's short-term rentals. Jerome was already pulling up his phone, Googling the address. Troy was right. Riverside Apartments, monthly furnished units, nothing suggesting elderly care. Every deposit you make transfers out within 24 hours, Troy continued, to an account I can't access. This doesn't look like someone paying bills, Jay. This looks like money laundering. The conversation ended with Troy giving Jerome a business card. Marcus Reed, private investigator, specializing in financial fraud. Jerome sat in the dark, staring at the card, thinking about 5 years of payments, thinking about the address that didn't exist, thinking about Diane's vague excuses and cold distance, thinking about the promise he'd made to a dying wife. What happened next would change everything. Jerome drove to Riverside Apartments the next morning. Saturday. Zara at a friend's house. He needed to see for himself. The building squatted between a laundromat and a check-cashing place. Brick facade, external stairs. Nothing about it suggested senior living. Nothing suggested Diane Jefferson would choose to live there. The building manager was a tired man named Pete, who barely looked up when Jerome walked into the office. "I'm trying to locate my mother-in-law," Jerome explained. "Diane Jefferson. I think she might rent here." Pete pulled out a rental ledger, flipped pages. "Apartment 214. That's been rented by the same person for 3 years now. Pays on time, keeps quiet, but it ain't no Diane Jefferson." Jerome felt the floor shift under his feet. "Who's the name on the lease?" "Kesha Williams." The words hung in the air like smoke. Pete kept talking, something about quiet tenant, weird hours, no complaints. But Jerome couldn't process it. His wife's name, on a lease, 3 years active. "Can I see security footage?" Jerome heard himself ask. "Just to confirm if this is who I'm looking for?" Pete shrugged, led Jerome to a cramped office, pulled up grainy footage on a monitor, started scrolling backward through timestamps. Then Jerome saw her. The woman walking through the lobby moved with familiar grace. Hair shorter, darker. But the way she tilted her head while checking her phone, he'd watched that gesture across 1,000 breakfast tables. She paused at the mailboxes, turned toward the camera. Kesha Williams. Alive, healthy, not dead, not dying, not buried in an urn on Jerome's mantle. "That's her," Pete said casually. "Kesha Williams. Lives alone, far as I know. Gets visitors sometimes." Jerome watched more footage. Kesha entering, leaving, carrying grocery bags that suggested income beyond what $300 monthly could provide. Dressed for dates, laughing on her phone, living a completely different life. In one clip, she carried herself with the unmistakable posture of early pregnancy. Jerome's hands shook. Pete kept scrolling. More footage. 3 months of Kesha Williams existing, walking, living, breathing. 5 years of grief. 5 years of payments. 5 years of raising their daughter alone while honoring a promise to a woman who'd never died. This is when Jerome made a choice that would cost everything. Marcus Reed answered on the second ring. "I need to hire you. Jerome said without preamble. My wife faked her death 5 years ago, and I've been sending money to support her lie ever since. The private investigator listened as Jerome explained the footage. The lease under Kesha's name. The monthly payments transferred to an account that wasn't Diane's. The apartment building that didn't match the story he'd been told. This is more common than you'd think, Marcus said. Life insurance fraud, staged deaths, disappearing acts. The hard part's getting evidence that holds up in court. Can you do that? If what you're telling me is true, we're looking at multiple felonies. Wire fraud, insurance fraud, identity theft. The question is, do you want closure or prosecution? Jerome thought about Zara. 8 years old. Growing up believing her mother was dead. Growing up watching her father struggle to keep food on the table while sending money to ghosts. I want the truth, Jerome said, and I want them to face consequences. Marcus Reed arrived Wednesday evening. 3 days felt like 3 years. He brought a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet, spread documents across Jerome's kitchen table with methodical precision. The first document was a hospital discharge summary, dated March 15, 2019, 3 days before Kesha's supposed death. Your wife was discharged from Mercy General alive. Marcus pointed to the signature line. Released to family care. Signed by Diane Jefferson as legal guardian due to patient's emotional distress. He pulled out another document. Death certificate. Filed the same day at a different hospital. Signed by a doctor whose license had been suspended 2 months later for falsifying records. 2 hospitals, same day. 1 discharge, 1 death certificate. Someone was running a scam. The cremation records came next. Riverside Funeral Home had no record of cremating Kesha Williams, but they did cremate an unidentified Jane Doe the same day. Cash payment. Anonymous donor. The urn you were given contained some random woman's ashes, Marcus said flatly. Your wife's mother handed you a stranger's remains and called it closure. Jerome walked to the box of Keisha's belongings, the one Diane had given him after the funeral, dumped its contents onto the table. Wedding ring, medical bracelet, photos. Marcus examined each item. Ring's fake, gold-plated, worth maybe $20. He held up the medical bracelet. This is from a hospital in Florida, not Chicago. The photos were next, printed on paper that wasn't manufactured until 2021, 2 years after Kesha supposedly died. Every piece of physical evidence Jerome had treasured was revealing itself as part of an elaborate production. There's more, Marcus said. He pulled out the final document. Life insurance payout statement. $50,000. Paid to Diane Jefferson as beneficiary 4 months after the staged death. Kesha changed the beneficiary from you to her mother 3 days before the fake death, Marcus explained. Cited marital difficulties in the paperwork. Jerome had never heard about marital difficulties. Their marriage had been solid, their future planned, their love genuine. Apparently, Kesha had been planning her escape while he'd been planning their anniversary celebration. Tomorrow, I'm recommending we contact the FBI, Marcus said. This crosses state lines, involves federal wire fraud, represents ongoing criminal enterprise. But I need to ask you something. He looked at Jerome with the weight of someone who'd seen this pattern before. Are you prepared for what comes next? Your daughter's going to learn her mother's alive and chose to abandon her. Your community's going to know you've been supporting a fraud, and Keisha's going to face federal charges that could put her away for decades. Jerome looked around his kitchen, at the house he'd maintained alone, at the photographs of Zara he'd hung to fill the emptiness left by manufactured grief. For 5 years, he'd lived in a carefully constructed prison of obligation and loss. Schedule the meeting, Jerome said. I want them to know Jerome Williams isn't anybody's fool anymore. Mini cliffhanger. Jerome made the call Thursday morning. his finger hovering over the transfer button like a man defusing a bomb. $300 remained in his account for the first time in 60 consecutive months. Transfer canceled by user. The words felt like the first honest thing he'd done in 5 years. The response came at 11:30 a.m. Call from Diane's number. First time she'd initiated contact in months. Jerome let it ring 4 times. Marcus Reed's recording equipment capturing every word. Hello, Diane. Jerome, there's been some mistake with the bank transfer. Her voice was different, sharper, more urgent, stripped of the grieving mother act. I need you to call the bank and fix whatever went wrong. You know I depend on that money. I'm having cash flow problems this month, Jerome replied, following the script Marcus had prepared. My daughter needed emergency dental work. Electric bill was higher than expected. I'll try to send something next week, maybe half. Silence. Long enough for Jerome to hear traffic in the background. Street noise that didn't match a quiet, residential area. You can't just stop sending money without warning. Diane's voice transformed completely. Hard, calculating. Keisha made you promise to take care of me. That means every month, the full amount. If you're having money problems, get a second job. Take out a loan. I don't care what you have to do, but that money needs to be in my account by tomorrow, or there's going to be consequences. What kind of consequences? Diane's breathing grew heavier, scrambling to regain control of a conversation that had spiraled beyond her management. Keisha told me things about you before she died, things about how you treated her, how you made her feel trapped. Her voice dropped to a malicious whisper. If you don't keep sending that money, I might have to share those stories. With your work, with Zara's school, with anyone who thinks Jerome Williams is such a good man. The blackmail attempt was pathetic and transparent. That's interesting, Diane. Jerome let the pause stretch. Because I've been wondering about something myself. I drove by your old address last week. The people living there say no Diane Jefferson has ever received mail at that location. Want to explain that? The phone went dead. Complete silence. Jerome immediately dialed Marcus Reed. She hung up as soon as I mentioned the address discrepancy, but not before threatening blackmail and demanding I take out loans. I got all of it, Marcus confirmed. FBI is interested, very interested. Agent Sarah Chen from White Collar Crime wants to meet tomorrow. Between the insurance fraud, fake death certificate, wire fraud, and now attempted extortion, they're looking at a potential RICO case. His voice carried professional satisfaction. This isn't just about you anymore, Jerome. They think your wife and her mother are part of a larger operation targeting grieving spouses. The scope was expanding beyond Jerome's personal betrayal into something threatening other families. Other widowers struggling to honor promises made to people who would weaponize their love. That afternoon, Jerome picked up Zara from school. Took her for ice cream they couldn't afford, but he suddenly felt compelled to buy. She chattered about her day, her friends, her upcoming art project. Blissfully unaware that her world was about to change in ways he couldn't yet explain. His phone buzzed. Another call from Diane's number. Jerome let it go to voicemail. Then another call. Then a text. We need to talk. Meet me tomorrow at noon. Lincoln Park by the lake. Come alone. The desperation was palpable, but so was something else. A tone suggesting Diane was ready to play cards she'd been holding in reserve. Jerome forwarded the message to Marcus, typed his response. I'll be there. Tomorrow would bring federal agents, recorded conversations, and the beginning of the end for a fraud that had stolen 5 years of his life. But tonight, Jerome Williams sat in his kitchen with his daughter, feeling genuinely hopeful for the first time since he believed his wife had died. The trap was set, and he was no longer the prey. Lincoln Park stretched along Lake Michigan like a green ribbon, walking paths dotted with joggers enjoying the crisp Friday afternoon. Jerome arrived early. positioned himself on a bench with clear sightlines while Marcus Reed's surveillance team blended into the urban landscape. The wire taped to Jerome's chest felt no heavier than electrical equipment he carried daily. But the weight of what was about to unfold pressed against his ribs like a held breath. 5 years of lies were about to collapse. Diane Jefferson appeared at exactly noon, walking with the brisk pace of someone 20 years younger than her supposed age. Gone was the frail elderly woman from Kesha's funeral. This was someone who moved with purpose and calculation. Dark jeans, leather jacket, eyes sharp and alert, scanning the area with the wariness of someone who knew she was walking into dangerous territory. "You look good, Diane," Jerome said as she approached. "Younger somehow. Must be all that Florida sunshine Marcus told me about." He watched her expression shift from forced friendliness to something harder when she realized he'd been investigating. She sat with careful distance, purse clutched tight, ready to run if necessary. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, Jerome, but you're playing with things you don't understand." Her voice carried none of the weakness he'd grown accustomed to. "That money you've been sending isn't just about me. There are other people involved. People who don't appreciate having their business disrupted by some electrician who thinks he's smarter than he actually is." The implication was clear. This wasn't just Diane and Kesha anymore. This was a network that preyed on grief and turned love into profit. "Tell me about the other people, Diane. Tell me how this really works." She laughed bitterly, pulled out a cigarette, lit it with practiced ease. "You want the truth? Fine." She took a drag. "Your precious Kesha came to me 3 months before she supposedly died, crying about feeling trapped, wanting out but not wanting to hurt you or lose Zara." Another drag. "I told her about a friend who'd helped other women disappear from situations they couldn't handle. Clean breaks, new identities, no messy divorces or custody battles, just gone." Diane's voice mixed admiration and disgust. "At first, it was supposed to be simple. Fake the death, collect insurance, disappear forever. But then Kesha got greedy. Said if she was going to be dead anyway, why not stay dead and collect from multiple sources?" She flicked ash between them. "She'd studied you for 10 years, Jerome. She knew exactly how to push your buttons. Make you feel guilty enough to support her mother forever. The monthly payments were her idea, not mine. She said you'd never stop sending money as long as you believed it was what she would have wanted." Jerome's hands clenched into fists. His voice remained level. "And the other victims. How many families are you destroying with this scheme?" Diane took another drag, eyes fixed on the lake as if she could see escape routes in the waves. "Enough to make it profitable. Grieving spouses are easy marks. They're desperate to honor promises, prove their love meant something." She paused. "We've got 3 operations running in different cities, maybe 15 active income streams at any given time. Your wife's in Florida now, pregnant with some real estate developer's baby. She sends me 20% of whatever she collects from you, and 2 other men who think they're supporting their dead wives' relatives." Her tone carried casual indifference of someone discussing weather rather than systematic destruction of human lives. "It's a beautiful system, really clean, sustainable, virtually impossible to trace." The confession hung in the air like smoke from an electrical fire. "There's just one problem with your beautiful system, Diane." Jerome stood slowly. "It's built on a foundation that can't support the weight of what you're trying to carry." He gestured subtly toward the surveillance team positioned throughout the park. "And sometimes when you overload a circuit, the whole thing burns down." Diane's eyes widened as she spotted federal agents emerging from concealed positions, badges glinting in afternoon sun like warning lights on a control panel. She dropped her cigarette, reached for her purse. Jerome's hand closed over her wrist, firm grip of someone who'd spent years working with live electrical current. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, he said quietly. You've done enough damage for one lifetime. Agent Sarah Chen approached with handcuffs ready. As they secured Diane Jefferson, Jerome Williams felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years. The solid satisfaction of a job completed correctly. With all dangerous connections finally severed, what happened next will shock you. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago buzzed with controlled chaos that marked high-profile white-collar cases. Jerome sat in the witness waiting room. Best suit pressed. Testimony rehearsed. Watching through bulletproof glass as news vans lined the street like predators waiting for blood. 3 months had passed since Diane's arrest in Lincoln Park. 3 months of FBI investigations that had unraveled a fraud network spanning 4 states and devastating dozens of families. Today was the day the system would finally acknowledge what Jerome had known since that first security camera footage. Kesha Williams was alive, and she was going to pay for the lie that had stolen 5 years of his life. Agent Sarah Chen entered the waiting room with professional satisfaction that came from building an airtight case. The FBI's investigation had been thorough and devastating, tracing financial records, fake death certificates, and insurance payouts across multiple jurisdictions. We've got them cold, Mr. Williams. The evidence is overwhelming. She carried a thick folder that represented the systematic destruction of everything Diane Jefferson and her network had built. Diane's cooperation has given us everything we need to prosecute the entire operation. The cooperation hadn't come easily. Diane had spent 2 weeks in federal custody before agreeing to testify against her co-conspirators in exchange for a reduced sentence. The network was larger and more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. 17 active cases across Illinois, Florida, Texas, and California. Victims sending monthly payments to support relatives who were either dead for real or had never existed at all. Jerome's case had become the keystone that brought down an entire criminal enterprise built on weaponized grief. Your wife was arrested yesterday at her apartment in Miami, Chen continued. Kesha Williams, also known as Keisha Martinez and Keisha Johnson, depending on which identity she was using with which victim. She paused. She's been charged with federal wire fraud, conspiracy, insurance fraud, and identity theft. The pregnancy complicated the arrest, but she's in federal custody now, awaiting trial. The image of Keisha in handcuffs, pregnant with another man's child while facing decades in federal prison, should have brought Jerome satisfaction. Instead, it just felt like the end of something that should have ended years ago. The courtroom was packed when Jerome took the witness stand. Every seat filled with victims, family members, reporters, and law enforcement officials who'd worked the case. Judge Patricia Morales presided with stern authority that made everyone sit straighter. Her experience with financial crimes evident in how efficiently she managed the proceedings. Jerome's testimony was clinical, factual, stripped of the emotional weight that had carried him through 5 years of unknowing victimization. He recounted the monthly payments, the suspicious transactions, the security footage that had revealed his wife's continued existence. Across the courtroom, Diane Jefferson sat at the defense table looking older than her 67 years. The confident woman from Lincoln Park, replaced by someone who understood the weight of federal charges. Orange jumpsuit. Denied bail. Lawyer whispering urgently in her ear as Jerome described the systematic way she'd exploited his grief. When their eyes met, Jerome saw no remorse, no recognition of the damage she'd caused, just the cold calculation of someone who viewed other people's pain as a business opportunity. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Torres, walked Jerome through the evidence with practiced precision. Bank records showing $18,000 in payments over 5 years. Insurance documents revealing the $50,000 payout that had funded Keisha's new life. Hospital records proving she'd been discharged alive the same day she'd supposedly died. phone records connecting Diane to a network of conspirators across 4 states, each piece of evidence built toward an inescapable conclusion. Jerome Williams had been the victim of an elaborate, ongoing criminal conspiracy. "Mr. Williams," Torres asked during direct examination, "what impact did this fraud have on your family's financial situation?" Jerome looked toward the gallery. Troy Henderson sat with Zara, his 8-year-old daughter who still believed her mother had died of cancer. The truth would come eventually. But for now, she was just proud of her father for helping catch the bad people who had stolen from their family. "I struggled to pay basic bills while sending money to support what I believed was my obligation to my deceased wife's mother," Jerome testified. "I delayed necessary repairs to our home, postponed my daughter's medical care, worked overtime constantly to meet the financial commitment I thought I owed." He paused. "The $18,000 I sent over 5 years represents money that should have gone toward my child's future, toward building stability for our family. Instead, it funded a lie that kept me trapped in grief, while the woman I'd mourned built a new life with my money." Defense attorney Rebecca Walsh tried to paint Jerome as a willing participant who'd never bothered to verify where his money was going. But her cross-examination fell flat against the mountain of evidence Torres had presented. The jury saw through her attempts to shift blame, recognizing Jerome as what he was, a man whose love and sense of duty had been weaponized against him by people who viewed human decency as weakness to be exploited. When sentencing came 2 weeks later, Judge Morales delivered justice with the kind of clarity Jerome had been waiting 5 years to hear. "Miss Jefferson, you have participated in one of the most cruel and calculated schemes this court has encountered. You preyed upon people in their most vulnerable moments, turning their love into profit and their grief into a commodity." The judge's voice was steel. Diane received 15 years in federal prison, her age ensuring she'd spend most of her remaining life behind bars. Kesha's sentencing would come later, after the birth of her child, in her own trial in Florida. But the charges she faced, multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft across state lines, carried a potential sentence of 30 years. The woman who'd faked her death to escape her responsibilities would spend the better part of her real life paying for that choice. Jerome felt no satisfaction in her fate. Only the relief of knowing she could never again turn someone's love into their financial prison. Mini cliffhanger. Outside the courthouse, Jerome stood with Agent Chen and Marcus Reed, watching as news crews interviewed other victims whose cases had been solved because of his decision to fight back. Families from Texas, Florida, and California had flown to Chicago to witness the end of a network that had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from people who trusted in the basic human obligation to care for the grieving. 12 families recovered damages through federal asset forfeiture. 3 supposedly dead spouses were found alive, living under assumed names. The FBI established a task force specifically for grief-based fraud after discovering how common the scheme had become. Jerome Williams had started this journey trying to honor what he thought was his wife's final wish. He was ending it having helped protect dozens of other families from the same systematic cruelty. "You did a brave thing," Agent Chen said. "Most people in your situation would have just stopped sending money and walked away. You exposed something that needed to be stopped." Jerome thought about all the other men and women out there, sending money to ghosts, honoring promises made to people who'd weaponized their love. "How many more are there?" he asked. "Cases you haven't found yet?" Chen's expression darkened. "Probably hundreds. This kind of fraud thrives in silence. People don't want to admit they've been scammed, don't want to believe someone they loved could betray them so completely." She handed Jerome her card. "If you ever want to speak publicly about this, we'd support that. Your story could help other people recognize the warning signs before they lose years of their life." Jerome pocketed the card, looked back at the courthouse where Diane Jefferson would spend her final years behind bars, where Kesha Williams would eventually join her, where a system that had protected their fraud for years had finally delivered some measure of justice. It wasn't enough. Justice never was. The years he'd lost couldn't be recovered. The trust he'd given couldn't be restored. The grief he'd carried couldn't be erased by a verdict. But it was something. That had to be enough. 6 months after the trial, Jerome Williams stood in his renovated kitchen, watching Zara arrange fresh flowers in the vase they'd bought at the farmer's market. The $18,000 recovered through federal asset forfeiture had transformed their modest home into something that felt like possibility rather than survival. New appliances hummed efficiently. The electrical system he'd rewired no longer sparked dangerously. Zara's college fund finally had a balance that suggested dreams might be achievable. The weight of manufactured obligation had lifted, replaced by authentic responsibility to the daughter who looked at him with uncomplicated love. The hardest conversation had come 3 months earlier, when Zara's questions about the bad people on the news evolved into harder truths about her mother's choices. Jerome had prepared for anger, confusion, emotional devastation requiring years of therapy. Instead, his 8-year-old had listened with resilience that amazed him. Then asked if this meant they could finally get the dog they'd always talked about, but never afforded. Children possessed wisdom about moving forward that adults often lost in the complexity of looking backward. Sunday dinner had become tradition with Troy Henderson and his girlfriend Maria. Chosen family that mattered more than blood relations. They'd learned that happiness was something you built deliberately rather than something that happened accidentally. Jerome's promotion to electrical supervisor came with a 20% salary increase and respect from colleagues who'd watched him handle catastrophe with quiet dignity. The man who'd once struggled with monthly bills while supporting a lie now managed budgets with the confidence of someone who'd learned the difference between duty and manipulation. It's funny how much easier work becomes when you're not carrying around someone else's deception, Jerome told Troy over pot roast that actually included vegetables this time. Luxuries he no longer had to calculate against fictional obligations. Freedom from manipulation feels like breathing clean air after years in smoke. Everything becomes clearer, more manageable, genuinely your own. The follow-up story about the fraud network had featured interviews with other victims whose lives had been rebuilt after prosecution. Total theft exceeded $400,000, all extracted from people whose only crime was loving someone enough to honor their memory. Keisha's sentencing had been delayed by her son's birth, but federal charges remained unchanged. 22 years after cooperating against other network members, she'd be past 50 when released. The child would grow up knowing his mother as a convicted felon rather than the grieving widow she'd pretended to be. Jerome felt no satisfaction in her fate, only quiet relief knowing she could never again turn someone's love into their financial prison. "Daddy, can we watch a movie?" Zara bounced onto the porch with the energy of a child who'd spent the day playing rather than worrying about adult complications. Her latest obsession was animated films about characters overcoming impossible obstacles through cleverness and determination. Themes that resonated with Jerome's journey from victim to survivor to protector of others. They'd developed Sunday movie night traditions, complete with popcorn and commentary that made simple stories feel significant. As they settled into the living room, Zara curled against Jerome's side with unconscious trust of a child who'd never doubted her father's love, even when that love had been exploited. The movie played. But Jerome's attention drifted to framed photos on the mantel, new pictures of them at the zoo, Navy Pier, her science fair where she'd won second place with a project about electrical circuits that made him call Troy at midnight with the news. The old photos were gone. The carefully staged memories designed to manipulate rather than commemorate. In their place were authentic moments that felt solid in ways the previous collection never had. These were images of a life rebuilt on truth rather than constructed on lies. When credits rolled, Zara had fallen asleep against his shoulder. Jerome carried her to bed, tucked her under covers in the room they'd redecorated together. Walls painted her favorite purple, shelves lined with books about girls who solved problems and boys who built impossible things. Tomorrow would bring ordinary challenges of single parenthood. But none felt overwhelming anymore. He'd learned the difference between genuine responsibility and manufactured guilt. And that knowledge had set him free. The monthly $300 now went into Zara's college fund, earning compound interest instead of funding elaborate lies. Jerome Williams had spent 5 years mourning a woman who'd never died, supporting obligations that had never been real, carrying guilt that had never been his to bear. Now he was simply a father who loved his daughter, someone who'd learned that choosing yourself wasn't selfish. It was the foundation that made choosing others possible and meaningful. Let me ask you something. How many promises are you keeping that were built on lies you never questioned? How many obligations drain you every month because you're afraid of what breaking them might say about your character? How many people in your life have weaponized your sense of duty, your love, your grief, turning them into tools for their own profit? Jerome Williams sent $300 every month for 5 years, $18,000 total. But the real cost was measured in different currency. 5 years of believing he wasn't good enough to grieve properly. 5 years of working himself to exhaustion to honor a promise made under false pretenses. 5 years of raising his daughter in struggle while funding someone else's comfortable lie. The system that allowed Diane Jefferson and Kesha Williams to operate for years wasn't just about 2 criminals. It was about how we treat grief in this country, how we make people prove their love through suffering, how we judge those who question their obligations instead of celebrating their courage. 17 families were victimized by this network. 17 that we know about. How many more are out there right now, sending money to ghosts, honoring promises to people who never deserved that honor? Drop your story in the comments if you've ever been made to feel guilty for protecting yourself. Share this story, not the sanitized version where everyone learns and grows. The real version, where love gets weaponized, where trust gets exploited, where the system protects those who know how to manipulate it. Because here's what Jerome Williams learned after 5 years of being played for a fool. Duty without verification is just another word for exploitation. Honor without honesty is just another tool for abuse. Promises made under false pretenses don't bind you to anything except continued harm. The bravest thing you can do isn't keeping a promise no matter the cost. It's having the courage to ask whether that promise was ever real, whether the person who demanded it ever deserved it, whether the obligation you're carrying serves anything except someone else's greed. Diane Jefferson is spending 15 years in federal prison. Kesha Williams got 22 years. But the system that made their fraud possible, the one that tells grieving people they owe endless support to prove their love was real, that system is still running. Still convincing good people that questioning manipulation makes them bad people. Still protecting those who know how to weaponize human decency. Jerome Williams chose himself. Finally, after 5 years of choosing everyone else, he got his money back, got his dignity back, got his life back. But most importantly, he got the lesson that might save you years of the same suffering. You cannot honor a lie by living in one. You cannot prove love by accepting abuse. You cannot build a future by funding someone else's fraud. Check your obligations. Verify your promises. Question your guilt. Not because it makes you selfish, because it makes you free. Subscribe to Channel for more stories about people who fought back against systems designed to keep them down. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we expose the next conspiracy, the next exploitation, the next truth they didn't want you to know. And remember this: choosing yourself isn't where the story ends. It's where your real story finally begins. Stay just. Stay loud. Stay free.